Today I'm speaking with Myndee Mack. Myndee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm very excited to speak with you because I've been watching a bunch of your stuff on Facebook and other places where you've got a lot of great things you're sharing. So we'll dive into some of that shortly. But just to give us a quick bio, Myndee lives in Dallas. She was widowed. She's a mom of three kids and two cats, one of which I've seen. So we'll see if the cats come back in the picture. She's a digital marketing manager. She's a Bible college dropout, which I'm sure we'll touch on. And she's the author of the upcoming book, The Life-Changing Magic of Self-Love, which is a 31-day practical guide to loving and accepting yourself. That's hopefully going to come out in early December. And she is a TikToker as well. I'll have the link beneath this video for her TikTok channel, so please go like and subscribe. And she is passionate about helping others cultivate self-love, which you see in a lot of the things that you post and create. So besides what I know about you so far, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe a few of your hobbies on top of that?
Sure. I mean, I really love spending time with my kids. I am definitely in my Swiftie era. We just went and saw the Taylor Swift Eras Tour movie, and we need a redo because our audience did not even stand up once. But that's been super fun. Since I'm single now, I started dating and meeting other people, and now all of a sudden Taylor Swift songs like took on a whole new life that I never understood before. Because she writes about breakups and stuff that I never had to deal with until recently.
How old are your kids?
15, 13, and 11.
Okay,
And they're
gotcha.
like the coolest people. Some of my bestest friends, my ride or dies.
That's awesome. And do you have any other hobbies you want to share before we get started?
The only I like photography and writing. I mean, like journaling and just writing to process and writing to share, writing on Facebook, oversharing on social media. That's a
Hmm.
hobby of mine for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. It keeps going like it keeps on hitting me that out of incredible journeys and pain, so many deep and sometimes painful, but just real life thoughts come out of it all. And it's amazing how that works. It's so crazy. Like things you'd never find the words for, all of a sudden you're finding the words for them. So, well, that
Yeah,
might be a good place
definitely.
to segue to your story. Let's hear, use because your words are obviously what this is about. So we'd love to hear, how your journey with Christianity began and how your worldview shaped.
Yeah, my journey with Christianity began before I was born. My mom likes to tell the story of how when she was pregnant with me at a Bible study during like their prayer, I started moving around a lot, and they all said that I leapt in her womb like John the Baptist did when Mary told Elizabeth about Jesus. Um, and so I was literally born into an Assemblies of God, non denominational type of faith. And it surrounded me. My first 4 years of school were at the Christian school that was an offshoot of the church that I originally attended. And then we started going, my uncle started a church. So we went to one church. I went to school with another church. My mom and my grandmother were big influences in my life, and they were very typical conservative Christians. Um, and so I was kind of inundated with it. And it was the truth, the way math is the truth. It was true to me the way the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, true. There was no questioning. I always had questions, but it was never about if God was real. It was just like, how was God always there? Or, things. I was always very inquisitive. And I learned quickly that questions that made anybody even the slightest bit uncomfortable and that were not lockstep with the belief system were discouraged. And so some things like didn't sit right with me, even from a young age. And I didn't have the language for just the way the church sometimes treated people. And that was hard to reconcile at times. But because I had such a love and devotion for Jesus, like Jesus was my best friend. At times, Jesus was my only friend. And even though
Mm,
I was raised under a pretty heavy religious influence upbringing, there was also a lot of like abuse and neglect and things in my home that were could be really isolating for a child. So I really relied on a relationship with God, a relationship with Jesus, to get me through,
Hmm.
you know.
So both your
And
parents were Christians?
my mom and dad are divorced, and my dad is Lutheran and just kind of went to church once or twice, you know. But the way I grew up, Lutherans were not real Christians.
Hmm.
Only, only we were real Christians, not really any other denominations. They had it all wrong.
Hmm.
So,
It's interesting you say that. My dad, who became a born again Christian when he was an adult, young adult, he said something similar. He had grown up in a Lutheran church, and when he got saved, of course, like in a Baptist environment, which where they're always preaching the gospel, he said something similar. He's like, I never heard the gospel once in the Lutheran church growing up, and it's interesting how that works. I'm not sure like what they would be coming together for exactly if it's not to get people saved. Is it like a social club? I don't know. I admit my ignorance, but anyway, what? So your parents were divorced when you were young?
hmm
Okay,
before
so
I was born,
okay, so but your mom was the primary religious influence for you.
yes,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah. And then as I got older, I my faith did not waver, my beliefs did not waver, my desire to be close to God didn't waver. But as I got older and really started to see partly the wealth disparity, we grew up, my family, my mom was disabled. And so we lived off the government and were those people that were seemingly demonized in a way and by the church that we attended. And
Mm,
so it really felt like I felt for I started to feel like, okay, we are obviously different. And if material wealth and good fortune, even if it's not material wealth, but like a stable home environment, even is evidence of God's love and God's blessing, then clearly this God doesn't love me the same. And that was hard because I was very young, very motivated, very much in love with God and Jesus and wanted to be a Christian. I remember my cousins, whose dad was the pastor, they would have youth trips and all these fun activities. And I couldn't wait to go. And they were just like, oh, whatever. Again, it's like they took for granted, where I was like begging my mom to take me to church anytime the doors were open.
mm,
And so when I was about 15, I was actually, yeah, I was definitely 15. It was the summer I turned 15. They had a youth trip and they were going to the beach and I was so excited. I had signed up, couldn't wait. And the day before the trip, I was in the emergency room having an emergency appendectomy. Like my appendix was on the verge of rupturing, they said. So
okay.
I had surgery the day we were supposed to, the middle of the night, before we were supposed to leave. And that for me was just like the final nail in the coffin. I was like, well, clearly, this God does not want anything to do with me because I wanted to go on this church trip and worship and connect and all these things. And I was really looking forward to it. And then that could only be described as an act of God. It wasn't even like I tripped and fell and did something stupid to land me in the hospital. Like a body part of mine just went haywire. So I quietly left the practice. I didn't really go to church much anymore. I was almost heartbroken. I mean, I felt like rejected by God. At that point, I wished I could have been atheist. I remember saying to friends, I would rather not believe in God than believe in a God that seemingly hates me, you know?
Hmm. Did you feel like you hated him back?
No, no, I felt just like a child would of a parent that rejected them. It's like I didn't hate God back. I wish I could have. That might have fueled me differently. I was just heartbroken,
Hmm.
you know.
So
And
you were
so
connect.
for
I'm sorry.
go ahead,
So
you go.
so you were connecting a lot of the like the open doors, closed doors, and I did this too, but open doors, closed doors with God's blessing and cursing. did you feel like that all the things that he was maybe not blessing you with and not connecting in the loving ways you felt like, did you feel like it was your personal responsibility or more like it was a, I don't know what, maybe a generational curse or just something that like it wasn't your fault, but it was still very much impacting you because of the family dynamics? Like how personal did you take these wounds?
Oh no, I mean, I thought it was me. I thought I did something. I thought I wasn't enough. I thought I didn't worship hard enough. I didn't pray enough. I didn't believe right. I was the person too that like almost every time, starting when I was about 6 years old, when they would do the altar calls and they would say, every head bowed, every eye closed. If you're struggling with Jesus, if you want to improve your relationship with God, put your hand up. I see you, I see you, I see you. And then they call you up. I did that so many times because not only did it's like I feared getting it wrong. And again, I was a child. It wasn't like there's no, like they say to have faith like a child. I mean, I did, you know? And no, I took it very personally. It felt like I had done something. And when I would read the Bible, I remember one story. It's like, I think someone was born blind, and they were asking Jesus, what did his parents do that he would be born like this? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't me. Maybe it was somebody else in my family, my ancestors, and I just have to suffer for it. Um, it did not feel good. But again, it did not take away from my faith and belief. That was just as real. God was still very, very real. He just wasn't interested in me. He
Hmm,
didn't care much for me. And I felt like he made that clear.
yeah. At what age did you put your personal faith in Christ? Was that as a child?
Yes, I mean, it was always there as far back as I can remember.
Yeah.
But I do remember there was a time when I was about 6 at church and I had the whole altar call, one of the first altar call experiences where I got saved. But I felt saved before that. I believed in Jesus before that. But again, it was like I always wanted to be sure, you know.
Yeah. So you, if I could just dive into the where you were at age 15 a little bit more.
Hmm.
Um, life is obviously apart from religion. There's a lot of ways in which we all can feel rejected anyway. People say, oh, everyone else is, looks better or is more wealthy, just, better life, better situation. They're better at sports. They always ace the test or whatever. They're cooler. There's all kinds of ways in which everybody in, middle school and high school for sure is kind of comparing each other. And a lot of us do and did struggle at that age with the issues of like, I feel like I'm not good enough. Who's going to like me? The
Hmm.
sense of like, I don't measure up. I'm not in the in crowd. Or if you are, you're, it's going to vacillate like the wind and you're going to be back out tomorrow. When you look at that normal stuff and then you add on the idea that the God of the universe, the author of the creation, and the one with whom you're going to have to deal with for eternity, forever in the future, he was actually upset at you in some way. Like, I don't even know how to quite ask the question, but how did you deal with just the crushing nature of that at that time, apart from just losing it? Because it sounds like it was really
Uh,
some dark seasons, I would imagine.
yeah, it was probably a lot of, I didn't have a term for it then, but like disassociation. I wasn't really there. Um,
Hmm.
and definitely I went through some depression. I was very, very shy. And I'm sure, like you said, it's like we already feel some level of rejection. To feel rejection from the Most High really makes you um, just not like yourself, you know? And then even when I did feel like God loved me or had some sort of plan and that, all these things I've gone through are going to work out for his good one day, there was still this mix of, well, your heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, and there's nothing good in you except for Jesus. Things Paul said, things in the Old Testament that it's like it conditioned me to not trust my own intuition, to not like who I was. And then throw on the rejection feel. And I just honestly, I'm surprised that I made it through those years. And I didn't do anything too stupid. I didn't get into heavy drugs or anything like that. Um, but I'm surprised I made it through those years as intact as I did.
Hmm. I know this will probably come up again in the deconstruction part of your story, but at that particular time, or as you were kind of trying to grapple with all these ideas about how God was feeling about you and how you should thus feel about yourself, did you have any sense of like, you know what, I did, I'm misunderstanding God. If my theology were more mature, I would feel more secure in God's love. Or did you hear sermons where it was just like, just rest? Like God is absolutely you can't do enough to anger him, to get him upset. He is like the prodigal son's father. He is right there waiting for you with open arms saying, I love you. Did those kind of messages and sermons ever make you just think, I wonder, I wonder if I've got God wrong? Or did you feel like you kind of just had all that messaging enough that you knew that stuff, but it still felt like it just didn't make a difference? Like, I guess what I'm asking too in another way is, did you have any part of just resting in your salvation at all?
No,
Mm,
no way. It was like, they would say that, that would come out, but it was always laced with, but be careful you don't backslide too far. God'll, if you're lukewarm, God'll spit you out. So it was like, it was almost, I mean, it was definitely manipulative. I don't know how intentionally manipulative it was, but for someone that took it seriously and literally and took it to heart and wanted to abide and be close to God, those mixed messages. I mean, that I just think about if I told my children, like, I love you, you're irreplaceable, you're amazing. But if you do this or this, you're going to go to hell, or whatever. It's like, it's to do that to a child who does not and cannot have proper reasoning abilities. Um, no, I never got to rest in my salvation except for momentarily when I sort of got back to it, which was about 4 or 5 years later, which I
mm.
can go into now if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great. I was just one really quick comment. I feel heartbroken for you because that age of like 15 is such can be is such a beautiful age of just enjoying the beauty of youth, obviously, the beauty of life, the beauty of your, parents if they're still around, they're still young enough that you're doing things with them, friends, you're just soaking it all up. You're so much knowledge, everything from, hopefully, advanced science and math to just, just being realizing you've got creativity and artistic abilities and just to have all this beauty that's like right on your doorstep and instead to have all those shackles it just and I
Yeah,
definitely I'm not saying it as an outsider. I understand a lot of that. I had
I
some of it
know.
in different ways, but man, does it suck. It feels like it's such a waste of time for no reason. But
I
anyway, feel
know.
free to comment if you want to and then take us into the next phase.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can say to that is, like, now that I have a 15-year-old, I get to watch her because my kids were not raised. We prayed every once in a while, very generic, like, Dear God, thank you for life, amen, kind of things when they were very young, but I didn't raise them with religion. So they are free to be whatever and explore. And,
Mm,
so I'm getting to almost see my kids experience what I should have and have just like normal teenage struggles. And it's kind of redeeming, you know.
yeah,
It's nice
absolutely.
to it's nice to see that.
That's
But
awesome. As someone that's
so
very
yeah,
concerned about how we treat children in that sense, I'm definitely applauding you here. That's awesome.
thank you.
Mm,
Um so it was, yeah, about 4 or 5 years. Again, I didn't get into anything too bad. I went out some, I drank a little, smoked some weed. Like I didn't get into anything super dangerous or terrible. But one night I probably got a little too high or got some weed that was really strong. And I had what I now see as like an anxiety attack or a panic attack of some sort. again, this was in like the late 90s, early 2000s. There's no real language for that, right? So I'm just like, I'm dying, take me to the hospital. And
Mm.
and so I get to the hospital and they're like running all these tests and my heart rate's really high. And I'm just like, surely I'm going to die and surely I'm going to go to hell because now now I feel like, oh no, I rejected God and now I'm dying. So I'm going to go to hell. That's it. It's too late for me. I'm done. And I'm terrified, which then of course makes the anxiety so much worse. And then I had like this moment of calm where I was praying. And then I felt like, oh, wow, I feel so peaceful. Surely that means I'm leaving my body and this is the moment that I die. So then I would just again. And I went on that ride for a little while. And then my boyfriend at the time looked at me and he was like, Myndee, God loves you. He's not going to send you to hell because you smoked weed. Just pray, like do what you're doing. You're fine. And he didn't even believe in God at the time. So that was interesting. So I just prayed. And then I remembered John 3:16, where it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, whoever believes in him should not perish, but will have everlasting life. And for the first time in like a young adult mind, where I'm not a child, just inundated, I was like, okay, so that means God loves me because I'm part of the world. And if Jesus died for me, and I believe that Jesus died for me, that even if I die right now, I'm going to go to heaven. And it was like I cracked the code, you know? And so I was like, whew, now I really know what it's like to be saved. Sure, before I was saved, but now I've got that story, right? I've got the, the drug use and the whatever. I've got that radical testimony. And my church loved it. They loved that story.
Mm.
They don't love the rest of it. But
Right.
if I stopped there, they loved it and they took it at face value.
So you got a chance to share it up front at some point?
Yes, quite a few times at church because I was like an older youth, I guess, or a very young adult, and just had, so they gave me like somewhat of a platform to share
Mm.
that story and my story and whatnot, and use it for God's glory or for their gain or whatever. Um, and
That's funny.
so I spent about another 5 or 6 years in the church. I was in youth leadership. I was getting discipled, which is like a mentor, like a Christian mentor thing for anybody that maybe doesn't know that. And I was discipling people and leading Bible studies. And I felt so grateful to feel that love that I had longed for and to feel
Mm.
that connection. And then it's like the honeymoon phase ended, I would say, in terms of like, after a short time, I learned how superficial and inauthentic the connections I had with people through church were.
Mm.
Um, Again, you could not ask questions that made anybody the slightest bit uncomfortable. And if you did, then there was something wrong with your faith. You didn't have, it's like somehow God was not big enough to handle my questions. If they, again, just weren't lockstep and in belief. I really had a lot of trouble with the doctrine of hell. I could not understand how God would send people. And I would ask that in Bible college. And it's like, again, it just was very like condescending, like, well, if you have faith, you won't have these kind of bother. You won't be bothered with these kinds of things. You really loved God. And it's like, I am here. I am in. What more do I need to do to show you? Not that I need to show anybody. I was secure in my salvation at that time. But it's like you could not have questions about the suffering. You could not even get too far as like, hey, Jesus said we should sell, like the rich people should sell all their things and help the poor. Are we doing that? And it's like, oh, we don't take everything literally in the Bible. But
It's
again,
amazing.
the spiritual whiplash of you are saved and chosen and blessed to you are wicked and awful, and you need to take every thought captive. And for a while, again, taking something like that literally, it brought me to a place of such self-loathing and self-hatred And it was like I functioned with this dark cloud of you're an evil, wicked, awful sinner person. And even if you want to do good, you want to feed the homeless, but that's only because you're prideful. Nothing we could do would ever be good. Just forget about doing anything good. And I'm like this bleeding heart, empathetic person that wants to do all the good. Yeah. But
Mm.
clearly I only want to do that because I'm selfish and prideful and hateful. And it's just nothing about it sat nothing about that sat right with me. But I believed I didn't want to go to hell. I still loved God. I finally felt loved by God. So it was like for a while, I was just sort of stuck in this. Well, I don't know all the answers, but God will explain them one day. So I need to just stop asking questions. Yeah.
Mm.
And that lasted so probably about 7 or 8 years of
Did
like
you
being go ahead.
did you feel like maybe even a sense of rest in the sense that that was perhaps a good place that God wanted you? Like, I know a lot of people, I've heard this even, I think, in some lyrics for some music, Christian music I used to listen to. I'd hear it in sermons, but this idea of like, you should wrestle with God, you should have questions, but at the end of the day, just like a child might, try to understand why their parents are doing this or that, are we there yet? Whatever, even the most basic questions, are we there yet?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we stopping? Why is this happening? Like, you can ask all these questions and you might understand some of the answers. Your parents might decline to answer and say, just trust us, it'll work out. But at the end
Yeah.
of the day, like, whether you get an answer or you don't get an answer, or you want more information, you don't get it, the implication is like, just like, still speak it, still verbalize it, because God wants you to talk to him, but at the same time, quiet your heart down. He's got it. Like, he's got this under control. And even the very questions that keep you up at night, not only is he saying, I want you to wait for the answers, and yes, the answers will satisfy you when I give them to you, even if it's in heaven. But part of this journey is not waiting for the answers. It's keeping your eyes on me with or without the answers. Like, just focus on me. And there was almost like a pride of like, if I hold these questions and all this tension, and yes, I search, but I just say, God, I don't need the answers. I need you.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, if I don't get my answers, you are more than enough. You're always more than enough. And that applies to everything. If I don't get my health, if I don't get the love life I want, if I don't get the finances I need, you are all I've ever needed. And all these storms, like, Peter trying to walk on the waves, like, I need to get my eyes off the waves and on Jesus. And
Mm-hmm.
and no matter what storms are here, that sense almost kills the curiosity at times, because you're like, I don't really care if I get answers anymore. I just need Jesus. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. That was definitely taught. And then I find it's like, how does that really play out? Like there was a girl at my church. She was around my age. She was a teen mom, a single mom. And like, whenever you talk about that, like being with God or getting close to God or focusing on God, she said something that really stuck with me. And she said, I would like to have a father for my son. And people will say, well, God can be his father. And she's like, God can't go out in the backyard and play football with him. Like, exactly. Like, how does this unpack? How does this look? How does it, when you say, like, I feel like we talk, like Christians will talk in like those big conceptual terms, but like, how does that really play out? How does God show up for you? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And so I started like, I couldn't stop with the questions, but yes, it was for me, yes, some of that teaching, but also I think that there was a hefty dose of fear of hell that had been instilled in me um, from birth, practically, from as far back as I can remember.
Mm.
People that didn't believe in Jesus would go to hell. And even though I never felt um, so much like, oh, believe in Jesus because that's my ticket out of hell. I believed in Jesus and wanted to have a relationship with Jesus because I loved Jesus. I still love things about the Jesus of the New Testament, whether he ever existed or not. I don't know. I don't care. some of the words in there and some of the way he would like speak truth to power, you know,
Mm.
and do things for the least of these, that resonates with me still. Um, but I think there was like a hefty dose of fear of hell somewhere inside of me. So when I would have those questions that could lead to the unraveling of my faith, which is what it ended up doing, um, I had to smooth them over somehow as to not rock the boat of my salvation.
When you were at that point of not rocking the boat, would you have agreed with the notions, where's your theology in a spot where you would have said they definitely do deserve hell, in the sense that
No.
just no. Like how did
Mm-mm.
you see God's holiness and the need for sin to not be ever in his presence? Like how did you theologically put that together with heaven and hell?
I couldn't make sense of it. Um, it didn't it didn't really align with whatever was inside of me, like that deepest, innermost part of you that your subconscious, your unconscious, your higher self, whatever it's that part of you, that gut feeling, that knowing. Um, just I didn't think anybody ever deserved hell. It was scary. It didn't it didn't seem right. And that's what happened is that was kind of the first wave of deconstruction for me was getting pregnant.
Hmm.
Um, we were attending, my husband was in seminary. We were attending a Baptist church. Um, and it's like as soon as I started to feel like whatever motherly love that I had never felt before for any other human, I was like, there is no way, there is nothing in the galaxy that this being could ever do that I would think they deserved eternal, any kind of, even temporary torment, but eternal torment, no. And does that make me more compassionate than this holy, almighty God? And if so, what kind of relationship do I want to have with this being? And those were like the questions, but I still didn't let go of the belief. I decided through reading about other denominations, I think maybe Seventh day Adventists and other denominations that didn't believe in eternal hell, and started reading like the Greek and the fact that like when Jesus was talking about hell as we know it, he was literally talking about a place where I think when they burn trash or something that was like
Yeah.
gross,
Yeah.
but it was like more metaphorical, not so much a literal place where people would go. So I was able to maintain my Christian identity without believing in hell because again, I couldn't what Christianity meant, I couldn't be a part of it. If that's what God was, and He would be okay with sending my own child to hell, it didn't do this when it was me, but it was like, you're going to send my child to hell for believing wrong. What if they did end up Lutheran?
Did you feel like you were
So,
leaning towards a more progressive Christianity, or were you just starting to exit at that point? Because a lot of people
yes.
grapple with that, but then they're just like, I can't leave. There must be
Hmm.
a God, and Jesus must mean something. So progressive
Yeah.
Christianity. It did that attract
Yeah.
you at all?
Yeah. And part of it, at the time, because this was like 2008, 2010, social media and the internet was like in its, prehistoric era almost. So there wasn't a lot of people to connect with.
Hmm.
And being in the deep South, because I was raised in New Orleans. So being in the deep South, there was no such thing as progressive Christianity. So I felt at that time that I just didn't fit. Like I had liberal friends or more, more progressive, like politically, but they were atheist or at best agnostic and just really didn't want anything to do with religion. And then on the other side, I had my Christian friends who were pretty much all conservative. So it's like, okay, well, I'm too progressive for my conservative friends, and I'm too Christian for my like more liberal, science minded friends, I guess. So I felt for a while like I just didn't belong
Hmm.
anywhere.
That's a hard place to
Um,
be.
yeah,
Did you know
yeah.
anybody else at all that was at least able to relate to your concerns?
had one friend who was on the same page for several things, but then there were some like big, more hot button issues that we were on complete opposite sides of the fence. And she really didn't, I don't know. It was almost like we butted heads a lot about it because I think we were both trying to work out our stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but that was it. And I think, I don't know where she's at now, but I think she kind of went a little more back to like more conservative, hardcore Christianity, where I still have respect for and I guess you could say in support of, in a way, of progressive Christianity. Because even though I don't subscribe to any of those tenets anymore, I feel like at least they're way more like Jesus. And, maybe they can do some work on the religion from the inside, but that's not for me. But I
Yeah.
appreciate and respect those faiths,
Mm.
those super liberal, affirming, accepting churches.
Yeah.
I'm glad
Could
that they exist.
could you take us back for a second? How did you and your husband meet?
Oh, we met working at Papa John's.
Okay, gotcha. Was he a believer at the time of your marriage, I assume?
No, so he was the boyfriend that I referenced when I was in the hospital, and he did not believe in God. And then when I had that experience, I was like, look, this is who I am now. This is what I grew up with. You met me during my time away, but this is where I'm at. This is where I'm going to be. No pressure. You don't have to come along. I get it. He grew up. His dad was like a non-practicing Catholic. His mom was Jehovah's Witness, and like just for a little while. And so he didn't
As a
have
mix.
any like background in religion.
Mm.
But
That's an interesting mix
he,
for his background. That's crazy. A
yeah,
non-practicing Catholic and a JW. Wow.
yeah,
Mm.
right. Uh,
It's
Holidays were
it
probably super fun growing up over there.
it sounds like if they kind of, it's like, I'm just digressing here, but if you had two
It's
people
fun.
that were that different in their theology, that had to basically be like, look, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and just let's just agree to disagree. If you kind of
Mhm.
left the kids in the middle to just be like, neither one of us is going to be too heavily indoctrinating you because we know that it's just going to end up being too brutal on you to have such a divergency. If you're leaving
Mhm.
kids in the middle in such a situation, I'd imagine that they probably did escape a lot of the worst part of religious trauma. I would hope, but hmm,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he didn't have any fear of hell or any of that stuff, and he was pretty atheist, or again maybe like agnostic, borderline atheist.
hmm.
Um, but because of his interest in me, he started to go to church with me and stuff. And then he had questions. I mean, gosh, he could have just isolated, pushed everybody away with his questions. But I respected that because I'm like, I'm just going to smooth this over and believe without question, or stop myself from questioning. But he didn't, and he asked the hard questions. And then he started believing, and I think it was partly because he was inundated by it all of a sudden, and it definitely, like, the church we were going to did a really good job of initially making you feel like you belonged and like you were part of something, and you had, like, you were like soul sisters and soul, you had like super strong relationships with these people, and they were going to be there, and they were not.
Hmm.
Like, that was just a short-lived, like, this is how we wrote people in, you know?
What do they call
And
that?
so,
Love bombing, I think.
yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly what that was. But, I was looking for friends and community and connection, and I didn't get that. I
Hmm.
got, I was like a project, like, oh, let's make sure these people stay and get plugged in. And then as soon as they did, it's like, oh, I'm too busy for you now.
Was
Um,
there any sense of you need to be on the same page theologically to raise your kids, in unison? Was that one of your
yes,
motivations?
somewhat. So we had gone, like, early in, we were at that non-denominational church. So I'd gone back to the church that I started in once I got saved. And then we moved over to Texas after Hurricane Katrina, and we found a church here that we really liked that was Baptist in name. But it was like, I'd say moderately progressive, but still not, they wouldn't call themselves progressive, but it was more progressive than where I came from. And so we liked it. And then my husband wanted to go to seminary. And so we moved back to New Orleans so we could go to New
Wow,
Orleans Baptist Seminary. He
that's
wanted to be
quite
a
a change.
pastor. Yeah. He wanted to be a pastor. Like he really liked leading people and helping people and stuff. And so when we went back to the seminary, it was a different vibe. You know, we lived on campus. It was very, what do they call it? When it was very like, like they had like wives classes, like women could go. It wasn't that women couldn't be in seminary, but they didn't have husband classes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
It
very
would
patriarchal or misogynistic.
complementary. Yes,
Complimentary,
I
yeah.
think yes. You know, the men were very much the men, and they were there was a lot of really nice people there. Like I don't have any. I have more negative experiences with like the more non-denominational church
Mm.
that didn't really have much oversight, and obviously Southern Baptists need to check themselves with everything that they've had going on. But in my experience there, it was a lot more. I don't know, like they let you question things. And that was actually what led to my husband's undoing of his religion was being at seminary and asking the hard questions and having the I mean, these people had their PhD in theology. They were very smart, very knowledgeable about God and the Bible, and they would answer honestly.
Mm.
And a lot of them didn't know. And a lot of them would say, you are going to have to come to these conclusions on your own. And so when he started digging and digging, he was like, man, this shit ain't true. Can I say shit?
Mm. It's of course it's interesting that I've always thought for the more liberal teachers in those schools, whether they're liberal because it's a liberal school and they're just fitting right in, or they're more liberal in their mindset and they just have to kind of keep it to themselves, even though everyone around them is conservative. Um, just like if you really understand as a teacher, as a professor at these schools, that this stuff just doesn't add up, and the answers really are poor, and they're just they're not, and you know the fact that you're claiming that this God is not a God of confusion, and yet everything just looks like such a mess every which way you look, and yet you stay. I'm like, apart from you obviously need a paycheck, you need to be able to pay the bills, so I understand why you need a job, but like, why would you stay in something that you just don't believe in? And I guess that's maybe where the clergy project comes in groups like that, where it's like, we just truly like, we don't know what else we do with our lives if we don't do this. Like, we don't have the educational background to do this or that. But you feel, it feels weird to me to think about people that know there's so many issues and still stay in it. Like, what's your purpose in that? I know that's a bit of a digression, but I definitely
No,
wonder that. I don't
I
understand.
I do too. And one of the things that I think now is perhaps they really want other independent thinkers.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways to do that is to teach them to think critically and independently.
Hmm.
And so they do that, you know. So
Almost like they're an
it was
inside doing an inside job a little bit
yeah.
damage from the
And I
inside.
don't even know if it's intentional if they're trying to like if they're trying to make anti-disciples, but that's what it did for at least my husband and I'm sure not just him, you know. Like
Did
I
that
know a lot
scare
of
you?
people.
Like when he
Yes,
started deconverting, did it scare you that you were losing him?
so much. He was respectful of me and my beliefs enough to kind of be more quiet about it. You know, he didn't try to change my mind or anything like that. And at it was shortly thereafter, that's when I got pregnant. So I was already like kind of unpacking stuff. But again, that belief, I didn't question the belief until I did. So that brings me to like 2016 or 2017. I was I had been away from the church for about 5 years. You know, I'd gone occasionally, but I had deconstructed the idea of hell. I did not believe in an eternal hell for humans, but I still very much believed in God. I still prayed. I still read the Bible. That's when I was, you know, so my kids are growing up we would pray at night, you know, just very blanketed, very sweet, um, you know, type of faith. And, uh, and then one night I had a question and I didn't have the fear of hell and I didn't have anybody to make me doubt my faith. So I really just like explored the question. And the question was, it just, the way it popped in my head was, what if God is like Anthony Hopkins in Westworld? It's an HBO show about like super advanced artificial intelligence, and Anthony
Right.
Hopkins' character is like the designer.
Hmm.
So I was like, what if God is like that and we are like AI? This is before ChatGPT and all. Um, but if we are like AI and God is our designer, and that God is obviously bigger and more advanced, just like we would be bigger and more advanced than AI, but maybe that God doesn't know everything. And maybe that God is sorry that there is so much suffering in the world. And maybe Jesus died somehow to like rectify the suffering for everyone. And just, I just kind of let that like play out in my mind. And I liked that God so much better than a God who just sits back, created everything, left kids alone in a garden with a snake. What kind of parent does that? Um, and then is like, oh, well, you sinned. So now everyone suffers unless you believe this right thing. And I'm not going to do shit else. Just sit back and let all the suffering happen and all these terrible things happen. And a bunch of these people who suffered in this life are going to go to hell because they never heard about me because I don't tell anybody that I actually exist. It's like, that is messed up. But if you were just a little bit more advanced and you were trying to do a good thing, like Anthony Hopkins was, and it went sideways, and then you sacrifice yourself to help everybody else, then okay, I could get more on board with a God like that. But that's not the Christian God. No matter what denomination you find,
Yeah.
that ain't it. So that was the beginning. That was the thread that I pulled that led to my complete and total deconversion. And it was about 9 months of study, prayer, talking it out, wanting to find a way to make it work, wanting to find a way to reconcile what I felt in my heart, what I felt was true with what I had been taught. And it's like it just did not align. It didn't make sense. Like I started to see, instead of seeing God as like this loving creator, I was like, you are kind of a monster. This is kind of terrible what you've done. Like you're sentencing people to hell for the crime of being born.
Hmm.
What? And so after about 9 months of writing and talking and praying, and I mean, I didn't want to lose my salvation. I didn't set out to do that. I just I wanted to make it make sense. I wanted to feel in my heart about God. Like I wanted to be able to love God. And it was like after being able to explore a different version of God, and after, being super against the doctrine of hell, I was like, what is there to love about you? And I couldn't find anything that was worth anything. And then I started looking at like the words of Jesus compared to the Old Testament. And I'm like, how is this the same being? What's if Jesus is that God, why didn't he come fire and brimstone? You know, like he came with such love and compassion.
And why
And I'm
didn't he
like,
come right at the beginning? Like, where was he in the Garden of Eden?
right, right. And like, where was he all throughout the Old Testament where, all of that stuff was so like the story of the promised land. I remember first feeling really sad that Moses didn't get to go to the promised land. But I imagined the promised land almost like a new Eden, just like this empty, beautiful, lush land. There were people there and they were murdered. They committed genocide and murdered every man, woman, and child in that place to take over the promised land because God gave it to them. Why didn't God find some empty land to give them? Why would, again, I don't know how Jesus is God incarnate because I didn't see Jesus going stealing land from people and murdering people. But this God did. So I'm like, I don't know how they're the same. It doesn't make sense. I still have, again, even now, I still have like fond thoughts about Jesus, but I don't think he was a savior. And I don't think I'm a sinner in need of a savior. I think I'm a person who has trauma, who's made bad decisions, but who wants to do good and be good, you know?
It's
So,
it's amazing the way that you're talking to is just the like one of the things always strikes me when I hear someone describing this part of the journey, in addition to the actual topic of like the psychopathic nature of Yahweh, just the bravery it takes to think or to say those words when you're so used to being put in a spot where you must only ever bow your knee in subservience and saying, God, your ways are higher than mine. I can't understand you. I will never truly question you. um, I might put out the fleece, so to speak, and test you that way like Gideon, but I'm not actually ever going to judge you. You're the judge, you're the king. I
mhm,
am, truly the worm. I'm the ant that you could squash.
mhm,
And um, the bravery that it takes, the guts that it takes to for the first time in your life to say, I think I'm going to play the role of judge. I'm going to judge Yahweh. If
mhm,
again, if you're used to it and you're just, you grew up an agnostic or an atheist, that's like, well, of course, I can judge Dionysius, I can judge Zeus. Why wouldn't I judge Yahweh? That's not a
right.
weird thought. But if you grow up thinking Yahweh is the only true God and he's truly the king, and he's done everything for you in love. It isn't just like a you better bow your knee because he's in charge and he has all the power and he can zap you if he wants to. It's like he has gone to the ends of the earth to save you when you were completely at the depths of your despair, the worst parts of your journey. You didn't, and even when God reached out to you, you metaphorically gave him the finger and said, "No, God, I don't want you. I want the pride to say, like you're indicating earlier, that the good stuff that I do is me. I am a good
Mhm,
person. I will not even bow my knee to say, God, I have nothing good in me. It's only your righteousness that covers me." And to finally, after all that background of his fear, of the fearfulness, of it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, and yet he loves
mhm,
us so much and he's done so much for us. How can you not be more grateful to finally
mhm.
say, I'm the judge? If you're neck deep in that background, boy, does it feel weird. And boy, is it's hard to get there. It's so hard to get there.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's like I always think of it in terms of like questioning my faith or thinking God is anything less than perfect. Um, it's almost like I had like a shock collar, you know, like sure there was nothing there, but if I barked, I was scared, you know.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. It's like almost like they trained me in that way, and I wonder how intentional it is because church is a business and they run off of donations and they need people to survive. So I think
Yeah.
the institution is responsible for that. Like I don't think God exists in that way. But if they did, they would understand me and they would understand my rejection of them and they would still accept me. Because if my kids choose to reject me at some point, I will still accept them, you know?
Hmm. How did you deal with this? And I want to just ask this quickly and you get back right back to your story, but how did you deal with just the, how would I put this? Just the fact that you're literally taking everything you think is true and you're flipping it on its head and saying it's actually not. Like, we've been in the matrix. It's it's real. It's not like you're changing your theology. Oh, I was an Arminian, I think actually I'm going to be a Calvinist. Like you're switching your entire worldview, and it almost feels like a conspiracy theory, if you know what I mean. Like I remember at the end of my deconversion process, as I was truly in the last hour, I was like talking through it to myself, like, there's no way that we've, as a species, been deceived for 2,000 years. No, that's not even, is that possible? And I was like thinking, this almost feels like it's got to be so big that to question it on that level is almost stupid. Like it's becoming like a conspiracy theory. But you're like, actually, I think as weird as it is to say it, I think this is all pretend. But it just like once you start to go down that path, it's like, okay, this isn't just like I am like now from our perspective, so we were escaping something bad. At the moment, you're just like trying to figure out which way is up. And it just like
Yeah.
for everything for for your entire life, up has been up. And all of a sudden you're like, actually down is up and up is down and left is right. Right. It's like this is weird. It's not just
Yeah.
an escape. I'm so thankful that I'm finally escaping toxicity. You're just like, I'm actually opening my eyes for the first time. How did you deal with just the weirdness factor of it all?
It was a total paradigm shift for sure. Everything, I mean, so much of how I viewed the world hinged on the fact that God made us, we were sinners, Jesus died for us. Um, so when, like I said, it was about 9 or so months of just prayer study, and it just kind of happened in a day where it was almost as like a glass shatter moment. And I stayed up all night and I wrote on my Medium account about it and I cried. I mean, it was hard to deal with. There was a mourning period, you know? It's like I lost a father figure in a way. It wasn't like you said, it didn't suddenly feel like, "Ooh, I'm free from that." Now I do because I was absolutely chained and shackled in evangelicalism. I couldn't I couldn't love myself. I couldn't like myself. I couldn't trust my intuition. I couldn't move about my life in a way that felt authentic and real to me. I had to, and I mean, it's like it was as authentic as it could be under that belief system, but it's like it just did not it didn't it didn't feel good when I got out of it. It didn't feel good to stop believing. I wasn't trying to not believe. It was like I thought, and I didn't think this at the time, but like looking back, it's almost like, okay, I'm going to clean out my closet. I'm going to take everything out of my closet, examine if I'm ever really going to fit in it again or if it's in style anymore. And I'm going to get rid of what doesn't work. That's what I was doing with my religion. And little did I know the entire closet was going to disappear and just fall apart. And I would have to build a whole new closet. So it was like just this, it felt like a devastating loss. Like I cannot stand when people are like, you just wanted to sin or your faith wasn't strong enough. It's like, you have no idea what you are saying and who you are talking to. But it's the same people who, when I tell that first part of the story and how I came back to God, they unequivocally believe wholeheartedly. They don't question a thing. But when I say that same person, as I continued with my life, and honestly, I feel like I grew to be a better person. I don't feel this way anymore. Then they're like, oh, well, you must have never been saved. You didn't really know God. You didn't really study enough. And then I'm like, well, I did. And I went to Bible college and I did this and I did that. Oh, well, you're just showing works now. And it's like, stop moving the goalpost. Like I believed and now I don't. And I'm a better person now. But it was a long, hard road, you know?
Can I ask, when you did escape, despite the pain, did you have any sense, and I'm projecting myself into this a little bit, but I just want to ask if you would relate. Did you have any sense of like ignoring the pain for a moment, but just saying, of course, this suddenly makes so much more sense of reality. And almost
Yes.
to the point of like it being like a joke, like silly, like why would I've ever thought that that could have been truth? And like just it, you start thinking back to the stories and their theology, you're like, that's crazy. Like all, and I was kind of defaulted to this cult's weird, that cult's weird, all that, the Scientologists are so out there and JWs have it so wrong. And I'm like, I was in a cult. It was just, because there's billions and billions of people more, it was somehow socially more acceptable. But I was in a human sacrifice, blood magic death cult. That there's nowhere else to put it. Like you were in a cult, period.
Yeah. It was. I noticed something at the church that I was originally going to, the one that from my childhood. When people, especially people who had been on staff or had been known, would leave the church, there was always like whispers and hushed tones about them not being right with God. They're obviously not doing good. So they're going somewhere that they can go sin. But then when someone left another church and came to ours, it was like, oh, God led them here. And it's like, can God never lead you away from here? Is that what y'all are saying? 'Cause it sounds like that's what y'all are saying, you
Mm,
know? But again, my salvation was too important to me to critically think about things like that, you know?
mm,
I dropped out of Bible college because of Bible college, because one of my professors was telling us a story about how her husband, who was like a leader of the church, was upset about a hurricane threat that like people had to evacuate. So they were concerned about tithes and offerings being low. And she wasn't saying it like it was a good thing, but it's almost like they just tell on themselves. And they like that is there are people now who have to leave their home, spend money to evacuate, maybe take time off of work, and you're worried about this mega church. I mean, it was like a mid-level church. I don't know, mega is probably not the right term for it, but a big church that has lots of money. That's your concern, not the people. And then I was going home that day after hearing that, and that just did not sit right with me. And I was heavy into faith at that time before I got pregnant. And on the way home, I passed by this little bitty church, and they were like, we're collecting donations of rice and water and this to bring to the hurricane victims, because the hurricane didn't hit us, it hit a little bit east of us. And I'm like, so how is this big church where I'm giving money to go to Bible school worried about offerings, and this little bitty church is actually being the hands and feet of Jesus? Like, that's where, if I, that I want to be somewhere like that. So I quit Bible college. I stopped going. I dropped out after that,
mm.
because it's like, I know people are just people, but like, if you are a God fearing, Jesus loving person, the last thing on your mind should be your church's income during a time of crisis. But it was the
Mm.
first thing on their mind.
Crazy. At the moment of your deconversion, it's obviously like a vacuum, and you're kind of programmed your whole life, of course, to believe in Jesus, but there's like this underlying assumption or context of like you have to believe in something. At that point, did you feel like there was anything you, for lack of a better term, believed in, or was it truly just like a pure vacuum at that point once that was gone?
That's a really good question. I don't even think I thought about it. I don't think I thought about, if not God, then what? It was so heavy and big of the, oh my God, this isn't real. That was so like earth shattering that I don't recall having a moment. Like, over time, I've like developed loosely held, I don't think we can know. I don't believe in a personal God like that at all. Is there something beyond this? Maybe, but I don't think it looks anything like that. I just think it's like, if energy can't be created or destroyed, it probably goes into another form at some point. But it might
Right.
be just another form, and like on earth. It might be
Mm.
that this is all we have, is what we can see and experience, and it might be that there's something beyond it, but I don't think it's like a personal being that has like stake in our lives or care what we believe. I
Mm.
don't know.
Did you feel like at that point you were connecting the dots that there may not be an afterlife at that point, and how did you relate to that question?
That made me feel so much better.
Really?
Yeah, so as much as I feared going to hell, I also feared going to heaven, because as a young child who believed with her whole heart and wanted to live in heaven, I was then informed, well, your mom's not going to be like your mom in heaven. You're not going to know people the same way. And it just like, you're just going to like worship God all day, but you'll have a mansion, which none of that made sense, because that seems also very materialistic. And it's like, I would like to have like a tent in nature and good weather. I don't really need a mansion. So it just didn't sound like a good place either. It just sounded like better than hell. So I wasn't really looking forward to either, you
Hmm.
know? And that was like your only options inside of Christianity. And now it's like, maybe I get to come back as a cat. They're pretty cool.
Did you ever see that movie, What Dreams May Come?
No, I
See that?
typically avoid movies that are going to make you cry.
Yeah. Well, that one definitely is a tearjerker on many levels, but it's the idea that the most beautiful dreams that you've ever dreamt in this life, it's basically they're all just going to come true. Not in
Mm,
some like this is crazy, stupid, like this we all know this isn't real. Like in not like I just want a birthday cake every day for breakfast, but like true like the true meaningful dreams of life that
yeah.
they're all waiting for you on the other side. And the most beautiful painting that your loved one painted becomes your actual world. That like when they drew a forest and a stream and a river, that's your world, is that forest and stream and river.
Mm.
It becomes your actual existence. um did that kind of dream world dynamic appeal to you at all?
Well, it kind of does now. Um, but no, I but I was able to make peace with the unknown way better than I made peace with heaven or hell.
Hmm.
Like when I'm asleep, I'm not conscious that I'm asleep. So at best, when I'm dead, I'm not conscious. And that's it, you know. If I am conscious, like if I was conscious before I lived in this body, um, then I'll be that way again and I won't have any memory. Like I don't have any memory of it now. So it's like, okay, either way. I don't think, I mean, just the way we are made up of so many similar elements of the stars and of the earth, it's like if there's more to this, it's going to be freaking beautiful. Because look at the stars, look at the earth, you
Yeah,
know? I feel like humans and religion messed it up a lot.
yeah, exactly.
Those religions, the religions that say it's my way or the highway religions. I think, people are free to practice and believe what they believe. What makes you a better person? What brings you comfort? What's good for you? Then I support it.
Hmm.
But when it tries to like hold the world back, you know,
Yeah, which it frequently does. With
yes,
going back to your story, was your husband still alive at that point of your deconversion?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah. So we both had some time as like non-believers, and I think that made our relationship better. I was very stuck in like ways of like he was supposed to be the head of the household, even though I was like more progressive. I still felt that, and like he didn't want that. That was not a role he grew up with, and he didn't, assign that. So it's like felt like we settled into a more equal partnership and things. And so we had a good five or so years
Hmm.
of not living in that faith
Must
together.
have been a sigh of relief to be on the same worldview page at last.
Yeah, that's when he really opened up and talked to me more about how he came to, his conclusions through the seminary because he said, I know how important your faith is to you, and I don't want to do anything to shake your faith. I don't want to make you worry about me. I don't want you to worry about you. But now that I got there on my own, then we were able to have like a lot more conversations about it. And he was really, really helpful for me to go through that and to have him there for that. And then he died last summer.
Hmm.
And I don't, there's no way, there is no way I could handle that under those beliefs because then I would have to believe that he was in hell,
Hmm.
you know, or believe that God did this on purpose for some reason. And, I couldn't with that. A lot of people lose their faith when they lose their spouse. I've noticed from some groups I'm in
Yeah.
because you just can't reconcile that stuff.
Hmm. It's so heartbreaking too that for so many Christians, they not only, I mean, referring more to the fundamentalist Christians, they not only would still conclude that those that don't believe in Christ are going to be in eternal conscious torment, but that actually agree on, at least theologically, with the idea that they'll be fully happy themselves in heaven. They'll be able
Hmm.
to know where their loved ones are in torture, and that they will have to confess that heaven is perfect and joyful and there's no tears. And it's I hate to say it this way because it sounds a little bit harsh, but when you believe in monstrous things long enough, it kind of makes you turn into a monster. And people that are
Yeah.
willing to say, I'm okay with dancing before my Lord while you burn in hell, and that's quite fine with me. I'm sorry, but that's the psychological abuse, of course, to say that to kids and things like that is awful. But to believe that, even if you don't
Hmm.
say it, just to know it through and through in your heart of hearts, that you'll be
Yeah.
okay with other people being tortured. I'm sorry, but this religion turned you into a monster.
Yeah, it does. I think it strips people of their humanity and their empathy. I still think I was like a good person. I wanted to do good and be good, but under that belief system, I was arguably a worse person. I made more selfish decisions. I viewed the world differently, and not for the better. I viewed myself differently and not for the better. But you bringing that up made me think of one other thing from when I was a child that didn't sit right, because my dad was Lutheran, so obviously he was going to hell. And I remember my mom saying that to me, that God would wipe every tear from our eye. And I'm like, is he going to just make me forget my dad? What does this mean? How are you going to like how am I going to be able to be happy in heaven knowing that people I love are in hell? That even as a child, it didn't make sense.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it does though. It really, I do think that fundamentalism like that can strip a person of their humanity. And I think it's partly intentional.
Hmm. I did want to ask, as we moved a little bit towards the latter part of the interview, when I read a lot of what you write, um, I relate to it both in terms of the content, but I also relate to the fact that you have a poet's heart, to put it that way. You have what I would say, and it has been said about me, and I hope it's true, that you have an old soul. You have a poet's heart. This is not academic for you. There might be academic parts of it that you studied through and thought through, and that your husband had thought through when he was at seminary and so forth. Academics do play a big role in deconversion, obviously. Mine was honestly purely academic. It was purely about mythology of the dying and rising gods. The fact that so many of the other mystery cults of the day were woven into Christianity, and that Jesus was quoting Enoch 200 times. Just
Mm-hmm.
endless stuff like that. It was very academic for me. But
Mm-hmm.
when you step back from that, and you let the waves of what happened in your deconversion and in your time in Christianity hit you, and you're like, I mean, just the emotions are endless. It's like, oh shit, I wasted a lot of time. Like, shit, this hurts. Like, I've told other people this stuff, and I've probably convinced other people to do it, and now I don't believe it myself. Like, I've wasted their life. But then going back to your original first, 15 minutes of our interview, the idea that God sort of loved you but sort of hated you, and that you've now got to unpack all this stuff of like, wow, I was in love with my captor, the Stockholm syndrome, and I hated myself over a mythological creature that dead men 2,000 years ago wrote and made up, and other dead men have since evolved and edited and redacted. Those dead men dominated my worldview for decades. Like, that's shit. That's really hard to deal with. And I think I love the fact that so many people come on a channel like this one, and a few others like it, and we do go through some of the details of this happened and this happened and this happened, but we're like, but this isn't just about telling the timeline of my story or the details of I deconverted because Noah's Ark doesn't make sense anymore, or this or that. It's like we're turning our stories, as it were, into poetry that is often exquisitely painful and difficult to read. Even if it's not actual poetry, it's like we're telling the story in a poetic way. It's like it. I honestly, for I would say at least 10 or 15% of my interviews, when I'm done them, I walk away and I think that was really hard to do. And I'll bet, and I was just the observer. I'll bet the person that actually told this story is going away. They're probably going to have a pretty rough day the rest of the day, having been so open about this stuff.
Mhm.
When I read what you write, you are taking very internal battles and you're putting them very publicly and very vulnerably for people to see basically what's going on in your heart of hearts. How did you, I mean, talk to all aspects of that. How did you decide to be so open? Um,
Mhm.
what is, what are some of the things that you want to talk about as you continue to be so open with, Facebook and TikTok and your book and other creative venues? Like what is in your heart that's just brewing, and how do you see people responding as they read that and be like, oh wow, she's like, this isn't, there's the facade's gone here, she's being absolutely real in every sense. How do you, like, what do you want to do with it all?
That is such a great question. Um, First, I want to say that a lot of the stuff I'm sharing now, some of it's new, but a lot of it is stuff that I wrote through it. So there was the mourning of the loss of the God that I thought I knew. And then there was the mourning of the loss of the life I didn't get to lead. There was a mourning of the decisions I made that will impact me, my children, that impacted my husband, that I made from a worldview that I obviously don't align with anymore, and that, I think is messed up now. So I had to mourn a lot. And during that time, there is no way I could have shared this stuff. Like I had a little blog that no one read, um, and I got on Facebook groups around that time. I noticed the 2016 election brought in a whole slew of people, and now there's like a whole other slew of people, like the people that are following me now, because I'm like, kind of been talking about this. I don't know where y'all been. Nobody was listening before, but I also wasn't sharing so real and so vulnerable. It was always still because it was like I was at that time, it was like from the wounds itself. And now it's like, okay, well, I have scars, but I'm mostly healed. I've done all the work, I've done the mourning. And not to say, I mean, I'm sure all of it's like an ongoing process, right? But having some distance from it and sharing it now makes it more possible. The fact that it resonates with people, it's like I'm still shocked by and grateful. It's like feel bad saying grateful because I'm not like I don't want anybody to be able to relate to this. But I'm glad that it's helpful for people who unfortunately can relate. And what I want to do, because one of the things that was happening during the latter part of my deconversion was as I started to pull on that sweater of my faith that had been so tightly held, I was being introduced to the concept of like self love. A lot of it through Brene Brown, even though she doesn't talk much about self love. I mean, that's what she talks about, accepting and, getting rid of shame. And I mean, I lived under so much shame. Everything was shameful. And so it was like I was going on two journeys simultaneously, one of like unraveling my faith and the other of just like learning about like what is the concept. And the more I learned to love and accept myself, the less I could be a Christian, or the less Christian I became, the more I could love myself. Those two things I could not be inside that faith and love or like or accept me. Now, if people can find that inside of evangelicalism, good for them. I couldn't, and I don't know many people who could.
Hmm.
So, what I want to do is, and it's not just religion, society doesn't, it's not, it's getting better, but it's not like super like you should love yourself. The media doesn't tell you that. Uh, Society, religion, patriarchy doesn't especially tell women that, or any kind of minorities, or disenfranchised people. And it's not so
Yeah.
good, I think, even with all the privileges you might have. So, so what I want to do is really help people learn to kind of like develop more self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love, because we're the only ones we're with from like cradle to grave. We're the only ones we're with 24 hours a day. And if you don't, if your mind isn't a happy place to be, if you don't enjoy your own company, it can just be a lot harder to get through life. Like it's hard enough for people as it is. So if I can help people see their innate worth, learn to love and accept all parts of them. Like I said, I don't think I'm perfect, don't think I'm a sinner, but I make mistakes and I make poor choices. And, I don't love everything about myself, but I love myself, because it's all me. So if I can help people through the book, through whatever I say, if I can help people do that, and if doing that can help me take care of my kids, that would be a dream come true.
I love it. It you're bringing up too the idea that I think is it comes to my mind probably not enough, but just the idea that there is an inner voice that we have that's often developed in childhood and developed by other people speaking to us, and we're kind of mimicking them and echoing them and back to ourselves. But like we don't recognize how cruel, how just astonishingly cruel we are to ourselves. Even those of us who would try to be the nicest people to other people around us, we can be the most viciously judgmental to ourselves. And it really is true. Like you almost have to do the work to just identify like, what do I actually think about myself? Like truly, not my belief system, but my worldview. What do I really think about me? And then once you identify it, to realize, okay, now that I am treating myself this poorly, how do I begin that journey of reprogramming it? Which obviously is, things like your book, other things like that where they would plug in. But like you realize I have been indoctrinated and indoctrinating myself to be mean to myself and aggressively accusatory to myself for decades. It's not something you can just acknowledge and flip a switch. I need to speak kindly, be kind to yourself for a long enough time that it sinks past all those layers of the onion. And would could you dive in a little bit more since we're on this topic to your book? Like, what would people practically be reading if they go through your book and any other kind of resources that you might be coming up with on a similar note?
Yeah. So it's sort of like a devotional, I would say. It's not, because it's not religious in nature. It's almost like a self-love devotional, right? So it goes
Mm.
through day 1 to day 31 and I have like an intro and a conclusion, and so it's like, one day we'll talk about your scars and like your pain. And one day we'll talk about knowing yourself, and we'll talk about it's like each day has a different topic that sort of scratches the surface of what had led me from self-loathing to self-love, the concepts that I worked through with my therapist and books like Brene Brown and other people that really study this stuff. um, it's really easy to read, and because I don't write it like a scholar. I mean, I'm not a scholar, but I don't, like some of the stuff I read from Brene Brown specifically. She's amazing, but it's like, oh, I really had to have some level of higher education to like make this make sense, and I want it to be, widely uh, available for people, because I think that, you know, doing the work and self work and self care and all that, that gets expensive. And so I want this to be,
Does
it's like a $15 book. You can, and one that, I hope is relatable and easy enough for people to grasp, because it's a big concept and it took me a long time to get there. So my goal with this one is to kind of like introduce people to it or take people into a deeper level of like a lot of things, and then go from there. Like what is your biggest struggle? Get a book on that, you know that kind of thing. And I think
mm,
being like a thing that has like a start and a finish and a place to journal, uh, it will help people be able to see results and stick to it. So it's like day one, I do this, and day two, it's this, and so on and so forth. And it's also very gentle. Like if you just do one a week, that's okay. It doesn't have to be 30 days and take you a year. It's fine. Be soft to yourself, because what I don't want is for anybody to get a hold of that and then start feeling bad that they didn't complete it. I think that's a lot. But that would be me. I would have been that person.
It's funny too, when you said 31, it made me think instantly of, well, there's 31 proverbs and God designed it that way, and one per day.
I didn't even think about that.
That was definitely in my mind when I was growing up. We always went back to, if you're a good, doing your devotions right, you're probably weaving in some Psalms and Proverbs.
Yeah,
Well, I love it.
definitely.
I love that you wove in the idea. You mentioned this in passing, but that you did go to a therapist, and for some of this stuff, like, we have to be honest. Some of this stuff is deeper than just watching, YouTube videos like this, or other stuff. Like, some of this stuff is so deep. You really do need people. Obviously you need a community of people around you, but sometimes, going to a professional for a season is really in your best interest to help really unpack this, because like this, like, what better investment could you make than an investment in your own heart, in your own future? Um, I,
Definitely.
I do want to ask to you. I know I'm running short on time here, so I'll keep this one short. But could I read something that you've written?
Sure.
And it's going to segue into a question.
Okay.
I want to be able to love my flesh, not to be at war with it. The flesh that houses my wicked heart. The heart so bad that a man had to die so I could be counted clean. I killed Jesus. That's what they told us. They said if I was the only person on earth, Jesus would still die to save me. But remember, only the people who believed would find everlasting life. The rest, like some of my friends and family members, would burn for eternity. I was a child. And you put that last sentence, like, I period was period a period child period, making us, read that much slower. You were a child. I guess maybe the way to phrase this is, I understand the idea that we want to give people the freedom to obviously believe what they want and to pursue what makes them happy. But there are a lot of religions that imply and weave into it that we must dictate this stuff to children, that they must believe like us. How do you, when you look at some of the worst parts of this that would include what I would consider psychological child abuse, how has your journey helped you to reframe how you parent? And how would you, wish or want to help other people that want to give their, even if they want to stay Christians in a progressive sense, but just how would you want to encourage someone to say, acknowledge the damage that can be done to small children, especially taking away their autonomy and their voice, and blaming them for all this stuff, that Jesus dying for them, but just to be able to give the next generation a better chance at thriving, even if they want to do it in a quasi-religious context. What would you say to people like that? And how does it come out in your parenting?
To people like that, I don't think there's anything I can say. It's their salvation hinges on how they raise their child. They're just trying to keep their child out of hell. It's terrible though. I would say don't do it. Don't focus on that. Like that's what I did when I was Christian. I just focused on God made us and Jesus loves us. Focus on that. Focus on the good. Let them fall in love with your God if that's what you want, how you want to raise them. Don't go out of your way to make them afraid of what he might do, because is that love anyway? I will love you so that you don't send me to hell. Is that authentic? Is that real? Um, so I would say, if anything, though I believe it would fall on mostly deaf ears, but I would say, don't scare your children.
Hmm.
You know, and the way I raise my kids, we have different rituals and practices, and we do stuff around the full moon, and we make magic. And I tell them, this may not be real. Do you enjoy this? Is this fun? We come together, we share what we want to let go of, we share what we want in our life, we connect on an authentic way, because I'm not just dragging them to church on a Sunday morning. Um, and I allow them space to have questions. And I've told them about my upbringing, you know, to some degree, uh, so that they understand where I might have like limitations. Like there's things I still struggle with talking to my kids about because of all the shame around it. And even though I've done all the work and, moved forward in a lot of ways, there's just some things that are still really hard for me. So I let them know where I came from. And that would be, like I think if you're honest with yourself, everybody that's within fundamentalism has some fear of hell, you know? Otherwise, I don't think they'd have as much hold on us, on people. So I would encourage people to think about what hurt you from the church and don't pass that on, you know? But yeah, I give my kids freedom to believe or not believe. My son right now is going to like he calls it Jesus Donuts because at his public school, there is a Christian thing in the morning and they have donuts. And he's like, I don't believe this stuff, but I really like donuts. And I'm like, that's how they get you.
Amen. Amen.
I know. I was like, look, if you're going to do that, be respectful, you know, don't go in there and be like, I don't care about this and, stuff your face with donuts. Go be respectful, but listen to what they're saying and don't just absorb it and think it's true because they have donuts, you know? And I say that about like any other stuff I'm into. I don't force my kids to believe any of it. I don't know what I believe. I just like what I like and I do what feels good and helpful, you
Mm,
know?
I love
So
it.
that's enough for me.
I love too that we're just when you step back from it all, even though we're obviously all going to make mistakes, we're going to stumble in our parenting compared to where we've come from. Hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully we're giving them such a better chance at least if not giving them actual like direction in this positive sense, we're at least removing so much of the negativity and leaving a space for them to, for their autonomy to take over. It's just it encourages my heart. It almost brings a tear to my eyes sometimes when I think about it. And just like, sometimes you just kind of people watching, but you're people watching your own people, just watching your own
Yeah.
kids and thinking, you guys have a better shot. This is awesome.
Yeah,
I do
for
want to
sure.
ask one final question here and we'll wrap up here.
Sure.
When you, this is a two-parter, as I often do.
Okay.
Could you do a quick contrast between your piece when you were a Christian versus your piece post deconversion? And in that mix, looking at your post deconversion, just what, how do you see the universe in terms of beauty and thriving? Like what makes you thrive? What makes you feel like humanity has a chance? What makes you feel at peace these days? Like just what do you do to pursue and create the beauty and appreciate the beauty that's in life that despite all the harder stuff that we talked about, just at this point there's still like just despite all this backdrop that we've come from, and some people have arguably come from a much worse background where they're just like they truly can't get over some of this stuff, they're not healing. But just to be wherever you come from, to be able to say, now that I'm out, life actually can be very beautiful. How do you create beauty on this side of it all? So start with the peace question, then how do you create beauty and appreciate beauty more on the side of it?
So inside of Christianity, I never really knew peace. And I sought peace, peace like a river, like Jesus said, and the peace that passes all understanding, all of that. But I lived under such inner turmoil because of the hell factor, because of the salvation factor, because of like Christianity just as a whole, sometimes moving in a way that didn't feel right inside of my soul. And some of the things they did, or their political things, or whatever, it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't resonate. And so I existed in turmoil. I didn't know peace until I stopped knowing God. And from that, like I think I have a post, maybe I'll share that one day too. But it literally is titled "Finally, Peace Like a River Flows." Like I finally understand. And in part of the self-love journey, I've realized that peace begins with me. It begins inside. And so I won't find like peace outside of me if I don't have it internally. And now that I have, most days, I mean, I have off days like a normal human, but for the most part, I exist in a real cool state of like being at peace with things. And I don't really, I've cultivated it from the inside more than I find it externally. But having cultivated peace, because I got away from the religion that tells me everything is wrong, and I learned to trust my own intuition, and I have some sense of I believe more now that everything's going to be okay in some way, shape, or form than I ever did, and that contributes to feeling a level of peace. And I feel far more connected to nature now than I did as a Christian. As a Christian, I felt completely disconnected from nature, and any sort of like reverence for nature was then deemed like pagan worship, which I learned about paganism. And that's literally like, I'm not pagan, I don't subscribe to any religion. But the way they follow the seasons and the cycles of the earth and the moon, it's like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. I want this. Where was this? And if there was a God, this kind of cycle, like when it's, winter, you sort of like slow down. And the holidays that the Christians stole from pagans weren't commercialized and they weren't about Jesus. They were like literally about connection to each other, to the earth. And it's just following the natural cycles of nature.
Mm.
And it's so beautiful that if there was a God, if there was a creator, that is absolutely how I would want to connect to that creator. But now it just helps me connect to myself. And like I said, we're made of nature. So it helps me connect to myself and to nature and to others when I share that stuff with them, you know?
Mm. It's amazing too, just as a side note, I say this tongue in cheek, that so much of the Bible is written around the celestial events. Pulling this book out, I interviewed Bill Darlison a while ago. I really need to interview him again, but The Celestial Journey of the Soul. This is basically an updated version of the book called The Zodiac and the Gospel, but realizing the Gospel of Mark is structured according to the signs of the zodiac in the right order. And just,
Oh, wow.
it's amazing to think, when you read through the Gospels, they actually are focused on the star signs a lot more than people realize. And it's kind of an interesting irony. But anyway, just to wrap up,
That
what
is
the
funny.
other part of the question, how do you, now that you're, safe in your own skin and able to enjoy and love yourself, how do you create and pursue beauty and just, what makes you dance and thrive now more than ever?
Oh, I love this question. You know, Part of it might have to do with the fact that I did lose my husband and, he was 41 years old, so relatively young, unless you ask my children, we're ancient. But I don't need much. Like waking up, like uh we moved and I live in a house now that has like bunnies in the backyard. And I wake up, especially in the springtime. It's not so much now in the summer or in the fall, but in the springtime, I wake up to like birds singing. Like sometimes it feels like a Disney movie. And I just wake up happy because because I woke up, because I'm here. So
Mm.
I don't need much. Um, Skylines, the moon in any phase, except for when it's dark and you can't see it at all. Um, the full moon, the crescent moon, the half moon, you know, flowers, connections. Like I have so many deeper and truer and more authentic connections now since I've gotten out of Christianity. Because in part, even though I felt like I was as authentic as I could be, I really wasn't being myself. I was being Christian me. And Christian me, it's like I was wearing this uniform that really didn't fit who I was, but I wanted it to fit. I wanted to believe. I wanted to be part of that until I didn't. Um, So now I get to like sink further and further into who I am, that it's like the people that I've surrounded myself with, they really know who I am, and they, for whatever reason, like who I am, and I love who they are, and they're themselves, you know. So I'm finding, like they say, like real recognizes real. So I think I've fostered more real relationships and real connections, and that for sure lights me up, you know, and being able to share and to hopefully help make other people's lives a little easier through my book or conversations or posts or whatever it might be. Um, that means a whole lot to me, because I needed that. I needed someone like me to some degree, you know, to
Mm.
share what I'm sharing.
I love that expression. I forget where I've came across it, but someone said something like, "Your story might just be someone else's survival manual," and
Yeah.
it is interesting. And in this case, you know, your book, you know, it might literally be someone else's survival and part of their healing manual. So it's awesome stuff. It's awesome stuff. Well,
Thank
I'm
you.
jealous too of the bunnies and the birds and so forth. We have some deer that occasionally come back across our area, and it's like you just you appreciate life more. You realize life is precious, life is short,
Mhm.
and it's like just soaking it up means so much more. And I know, you know, I talked before about the weirdness factor. Like I love that we can go outside at night and just like look up at the stars, and there's not even like a fraction of a hint of a thought of Yahweh did that. Like it's just gone. Like that part of it's just gone. And there's still obviously a lot of questions. Where did it all come from? How, you know, where is it going? Why is there something rather than nothing? There's still a lot of big questions. It's just the really bad answers that we were so addicted to are gone. It's like now you
Yeah.
can actually ask the questions and, you know, be free with the gray areas and with the not, you know, learning to be free with the not knowing, but just be like, but the bad answers are gone. And it
Yes.
makes your heart dance a little bit to look at nature and your children's eyes and see them hopefully a little bit more accurately than you did before. But well,
Yeah, definitely.
I know I asked you a lot of questions and we're out of time, but did you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh my, no, this was really an honor to be able to be here and share this stuff. But no, I don't have anything else to add.
Awesome. Well, likewise, it's an honor to speak with you, and I appreciate all you're doing. And just to mention one more time, I'm going to have all the links for Myndee beneath this video for TikTok. And once we have your book available, will it be on Amazon?
Yes.
Once it's on Amazon, I'll have the link there. So we'll touch base when that's out and get that link there. But everyone, please
Thank you.
do check her out on TikTok. Is there anywhere else besides TikTok people should look for you at the moment?
Instagram, I'm there some. I mean, if you really want to know me, follow me on TikTok. Like, I have no niche. I just talk about whatever. And I don't sell anything over there. It's just me.
No essential oils?
No. I do
Awesome.
use them. They help with headaches.
Yes, yes,
I will give them that.
absolutely. Um, well, awesome. Well, I'll have all the links that I can for how people can connect with you. But Myndee, thank you so much. It's been awesome to hear your story,
Sure.
and definitely want to do it again, especially as you know, if you come up with more books and you know different ways your creativity comes out. Let's definitely do it again. But I'll just wrap
Okay.
up by saying we've been speaking with Myndee Mack. Myndee, thank you so much. Great to hear your story and great to get to know you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.